Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming out today and testifying. First of all, I believe it was last summer, we were invited, the Game and Fisheries Committee, to the Game Commission headquarters for an overview of your deer management program. And if I remember correctly, you basically have a three-prong approach to how you manage deer. One was forests and forestry. One was deer-human conflicts, which to my, I guess, shouldn't have been a surprise, has to do with insurance companies and the amount of car accidents caused by deer. Is that accurate?
No.
Not completely?
No.
Okay. We'll have to revisit that.
It has to do with farmers and landowners, basically.
Okay. But I do remember that being
Yep.
a component of it. So we can revisit that at some point, just so I can get my information corrected. And then the third part, which when I left that meeting, was hunters. And it appeared to me that the hunters were probably the least important of those three groups as far as your decision-making in your deer management programs. And I just, you know, for all the talk we hear both from the Game Commission and the Fish and Boat Commission, the newfound phrase is the science, the science, the science. Okay, that's the default fallback response. And yet, I don't see the science. And maybe you're not showing it to us. Maybe I don't see it. I really don't see it. I'll give you a few examples. The survey, to go back to Representative Maloney's point, not even 1,000 random households by telephone survey of what people think is the appropriate level of the deer herd. That is absurd. To me, that's embarrassing. I'll give you an example. If I got a phone call at my house and said, would you rate your satisfaction of your shopping experience at the King of Prussia Mall? And I answered that question. Do you think, just for the record, I haven't been to the King of Prussia Mall and I can't tell you how long. Okay, so I have no idea what that experience is like. And if I said, oh, King of Prussia Mall, I think I heard of that place once. It must be nice down there. Oh, yeah, it's good. It's great. Yep, King of Prussia Mall is great. Well, that goes into the survey. One satisfied customer for the King of Prussia Mall. Oh, I see these nice deer in the backyard. Oh, they're such beautiful animals. Oh, I think the deer herd's great. Now, that doesn't sound credible. That has no credibility as far as I'm concerned with using that as a huge component of your decision to figure out, is the deer herd appropriate based on surveys of people in the state? And I said this is a continuation from the annual report a few weeks ago, but who are the experts? The hunters are the experts. The hunters are the ultimate conservationists. The hunters are the ones who spend more time in the forest, in the fields, than anybody else, who see more deer, who can personally testify to what they experience more than anybody. Not even close. So why they're not the largest component of your deer management program, I have no idea, but it should be. The second question with the science is, when we have a DMAP program, and as you reported at your annual report, and again this morning from Representative Kula, 47% of your people are reporting what they're harvesting, yet they are required to report, correct?
Correct.
They're required to report, and I asked you at the annual report, there was no consequence for not reporting. Why aren't those DMAPs pulled from those people who refuse to report?
I can tell you from experience, when we did DMAP the initial year, and there were consequences identified, we were asked by members of the General Assembly and by commission members to exonerate the people, give them a pass, and allow them to participate in the future. That is why we are not imposing upon people. It's more important for us to know the consequences of their hunting effort and the permit.
I'm not quite sure I understand that response, to be honest with you. Can you say that again? You're saying the General Assembly asked you to not implement consequences?
I can tell you, I didn't say the General Assembly. I said members of the General Assembly and commissioners and others who have influence ask us to look the other way take the response late, take the response, just enable people to continue to participate, because the consequences were failure to report will result in a fine and lack of participation in subsequent years.
Okay, well, the whole point is to have people participate.
The whole point,
and accurately know what deer are being harvested.
The whole point is for citizens to, yes, to take on the responsibility that they signed on for, which is you buy a permit, you go out and hunt. If you harvest a deer, you report it. If you don't harvest a deer, you report it.
Right.
It's very simple, pretty straightforward.
But
yet less than half do that.
Right. So there are no consequences for not reporting.
Well, we attempted, as I said, in year one, we attempted to enact consequences, and we were asked not to.
So when was year one?
Oh, when was year one?
2003.
Three.
Okay. So after year one, you stopped
So
imposing
after
any
year
consequences?
one, we started reminding people to apply and using minimum numbers and estimating harvest. Because again, as it was pointed out, that in most units, it's inconsequential in terms of the overall management decision, because we're accounting for 1 to 2% of the overall antlerless harvest within a management unit.
Thank you for saying that, because it reinforces just how flawed your whole policy is. How do you possibly know it's 1 to 2% when people aren't reporting and you have no idea what's being harvested?
We absolutely do know.
How?
Again, unless you're dissatisfied with an estimate, because we are estimating harvest, there's no doubt about that, and we have reported to the Assembly in the past on how we estimate harvest. We report at we had a discussion on Monday with the Board of Commissioners on methods for estimating harvest, because less than 100% of folks who actually participate in hunting, harvest a deer, actually report it to the Game Commission. We're forced to estimate harvest. And we do it with relatively good, I think, statistical precision.
Well, I think that reinforces another point of your failed science with using estimations, as I brought up at the annual hearing, where doing simple calculations, 1 out of 3 hunters harvested a deer, which I said would probably be laughed at if you took that out throughout the state to the hunters. And how you can estimate. Why don't we have some kind of more precise reporting measures like some other states do?
For example.
And the response I got back right immediately after the meeting was, oh, we can't do that. We can't ask people to report. Why not? Well, because it's going to be 50 cents, 70 cents a person. Well, I don't know if that's accurate or not. And I don't know why it would cost that much to have somebody report. So how about and I'm not suggesting this idea, like I said before, if somebody buys a deer license and they go back the next year to buy their deer license, you ask them a question. Did you harvest a deer last year, yes or no? And you document it. You make it mandatory reporting. But if you're not going to reinforce or enforce DMAP reporting for consequences, what does it matter? There's no way the science can be accurate.
We recently summarized information for the Board of Commissioners, and we certainly share with members of this committee and the General Assembly different reporting methods and different alternatives. And the ones that you've mentioned, Representative, have been discussed. And again, our job, at least my job within the Bureau and within the agency, is to provide counsel to the Executive Director and Board. I don't make those decisions, but we will provide them counsel. We'll provide the best information we can on reporting alternatives, and we have done that. I can't help but reflect, and we're so fond of anecdote, so anecdotally, that many people across the United States are looking at Pennsylvania's deer management program, and rather than running away from it, they're emulating it. So if it is so wrong and so broken,
can you give me examples of 3 states that are doing that right now?
We're seeing examples where people have abandoned check stations, and they're using the same methods for calculating reporting rates that we are doing.
Where?
The state of Maryland, as an example.
Yes. In terms of states emulating Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, Wisconsin are 3 that I can give you. New York and Virginia are working and have projects on the ground right now to develop a forest sampling system similar to what we have for their deer programs, and we've been in contact with Wisconsin here recently because they've gotten rid of their check stations. If you look at other states, and we did this survey of the Northeast from Virginia up into the Canadian provinces, there's only 3 states that estimate the total harvest. Pennsylvania, New York, they use a similar method. Ontario uses a hunter survey, which Pennsylvania also uses as a double check of our reporting rate estimates. All other states provide minimum counts as their harvest estimate, or their harvest, not an estimate. They operate off of a minimum count. If we did that in Pennsylvania, we'd be operating off of 120,000 reports at this point. And many of them have no idea what that compliance represents.
Did you say that Maryland was one of those states that's moving away?
They changed their reporting rate.
Maryland no longer has check stations.
Do they have mandatory reporting?
Yes, all these states have mandatory reporting.
Thank you.
Just as we
Thank
do.
you.
We have mandatory reporting also. But let me, I guess, say one last thing. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We are not pleased. We're not happy with the reporting rates that we're getting. We're dissatisfied. We'd love to come back to the board every year, to members of the assembly, and say 100% of the folks that bought a license last year reported, okay, or 100% of the folks who harvested a deer actually reported. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So we do need to figure a way to determine what the harvest was so we can make the best possible recommendation so that we are managing this resource in the most responsible way, or at least the best way that we can.
But you've been using the same methodology for how long?
Oh, we've altered the methodologies several times over the years.
Yeah. The current harvest estimates have been in place, the method has since 2004.
So you haven't changed it in 10 years.
Correct.
And the population has plummeted. And I go back
That's
to
not true.
my issue
That's
with the
not true,
science. Okay, my issue with the science goes all the way back to when the whole deer management program changed in 2001. Okay, which I didn't really at that time have a problem with because I didn't know exactly what was going to happen and the impact. But I do remember specifically that one of the primary talking points was that the buck to doe ratio was so out of whack that there were 36 doe for every buck. That needed to be adjusted. Antler restrictions were implemented to bring in bigger buck, which I don't really have that much of a problem with myself. But it was only a few years after that that I go to a hearing held by then Representative Grusella and Daly, and I asked the commission members there, you know, well, what's happened here? They had no idea what I was talking about. So here you have a scientifically based opportunity to manage a program, a deer herd, based on what to me sounds like sound science, looking at buck to doe ratio, something we can verify, something we have facts that we can check and study, empirical data, and nobody has any idea. You're using horrendously flawed estimation reports. You don't know buck to doe ratio. You've got WMUs that are controversial. You're not requiring people with consequence who are in DMAP, so therefore you have no idea what, even on that small scale, what people are doing or not doing. You know, we've asked, what's the position on coyote predation? How much coyote predation is there? Oh, there's no reason to even do a study, or bear predation or anything else, because that came up in the last 2 years. So I'd like to know what science, other than trying to find out fawn fatality rates and survival rates, what science are you using?
I think all of the things you mentioned, frankly, are based upon studies that, many of the things, I should say, not certainly all, but many are based upon studies that actually have been conducted. And so I'm at a loss. And in fact, I think our program was subjected to 3 different audits over the last decade. All of them basically said the science was good. There are tweaks that we could make. There are changes that we could make. We've incrementally incorporated those. We've subjected our studies, our research, looking at fawn survival and predation studies out on the landscape. We've had radio transmitters and collars on more than 5,000 deer on Pennsylvania's landscape over the last decade and looked at predation as an example. So there have been a lot of studies. So I'm not certain actually what you're asking.
Well, this will be my last question, Mr. Chairman, and respect to everybody else. When's the last predation study that was done? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll answer. The last predation study was conducted in 2000, 2001. Since that time, we've been monitoring fawn to doe ratios, and we have seen stable fawn to doe ratios in every unit since 2003. We look at fawn to doe ratios in the harvest because we know from that fawn study that most of that predation is occurring during the summer. So by the time fawns enter into the hunting season, when we begin to sample them, those fawns represent the fawns that have survived the predation period. So that's the method that we use, and I would encourage you in terms of the data, the back of that first packet, the large one in terms of antlerless allocation, our recommendations and supporting information, and the back of that packet for every single unit is listings of the data that we use, and then it also provides the charts and the technique that we step through in order to get to our recommendations. So the data are in that one packet of information that you have.